I'm all for girls that don't know too much. It's a different class.
Unmasking the evil
I tell lies when it suits me.
that had been staring us in the face.
A man who's actually telling us things we should have taken seriously.
It was evil.
Hiding in plain sight. That's exactly what he was doing.
Pay attention to the pitch.
No, she knows nothing.
It's higher than his baseline.
Have relationships and sex been casual?
He mentioned the S word.
This is Jimmy Savile doing Control.
Savile was able to groom not just individual victims, but the whole nation.
A Discovery Plus original.
For years, he was a TV and radio superstar and a friend of the rich and famous.
He was pretty much ingrained in the nation's consciousness.
Nobody tells me to do anything, baby.
Oh, right.
I tell them what's happening.
He had friends in the very highest echelons of society.
But since his death in 2011, the sinister truth about Jimmy Savile has been revealed.
He was just sadistic in what he wanted to do and what he wanted other people to do.
Jimmy Savile, once one of the nation's favorite stars, adored by millions of TV viewers, is now regarded as one of the country's most prolific sex offenders. His preying on young victims and just how he was allowed to carry on abusing children for decades are crimes that shook Britain. On the 9th of November 2011, a funeral cortege moved slowly through the city of Leeds. The streets lined by a respectful public. They weren't there to say goodbye to royalty or a head of state, however. They'd come to pay their respects to a DJ, charity worker, and much-loved icon.
He was absolutely worshipped by thousands and thousands of people. You couldn't move in Leeds when it was a funeral. The streets were packed solid, you know, traffic was stopped, everything stopped.
At 2 this afternoon, Sir Jimmy Savile's gold coffin made its way down Cookridge Street in Leeds.
I can't think of any media celebrity today who is more famous than he was then.
Flags at half-mast outside Leeds General Infirmary, where he'd raised so much for charity.
He was a demigod.
Just days later, however, stories began to emerge that confounded the country. Rumours that had circulated for years were coming true. Jimmy Savile, once the nation's favourite entertainer, was in fact a rapist, a sadist and a paedophile. Jimmy Savile was born in Leeds on the 31st of October, 1926. As a young man, he worked as a coal miner before an injury forced him to change career. He became an entertainer and began running several nightclubs in the north of England. It wasn't long before his reputation preceded him.
When Jimmy Savile first came to Leeds, no one knew him, and after a month, everybody in Leeds knew him or have heard of him because they are outlandish things that he used to do. The way he dressed, the way he did his hair, for instance, you know, just to get himself noticed.
You know, if he came to our house, there'd obviously be a couple of, I'd say a couple of dozen, it could be a couple of hundred people all outside the house and round his car. And, you know, so you'd obviously walk around with a big chest and your head held high, you know, saying, oh, is that my uncle, sort of thing. We never went out saying, you know, we've got a famous uncle called Jimmy Savile or all like that. He was just Uncle Jimmy and that was it, really.
He was a well-known figure in the north of England. He was a sort of an amateur disc jockey who hadn't really broken into television yet.
And he introduced dancing to records, which had never happened before. He started for younger people on a lunchtime, just dancing to records, and it really took off.
Jimmy Savile began working at the Locarno nightclub in Leeds in the late 1950s. Dennis Lemon was employed by the club and became Savile's unofficial minder.
He tried to give himself this reputation of a tough guy in a restaurant, all this, that and other, and I think he was as soft as anything. He just wanted somebody at his shoulders in case somebody did take a swing.
Even as his showbiz career was taking off, Jimmy Savile began to be dogged by accusations.
When I was talking to the assistant manager one night, and Jimmy came through the door, and evening Jimmy, you know, and just walked straight past us. And I said, what's wrong with Jimmy? He said, he's in a bad mood. He said, oh, he's got a lot on his mind. I said, well, what's wrong with him now? He says, he's in court tomorrow. What for? He says, messing about with girls. And I thought, well, he may have taken one out and, as the phrase goes, tried it on and it didn't work and they've complained about him, you know. And that was that. Nothing else said. Until next time I was on duty, a couple of nights later, and I happened to say, how did Jimmy go on in court? So I said, oh, it never got to court. It got thrown out. Case dropped. And I said, how did he manage that one then? He said, same as he did last time. He said he paid him off.
Having narrowly escaped any charges by paying off his accuser's family, Savile apparently felt no need to curb his behaviour.
What's amazing is how brazen he was, how public he was, even then. I think he's just an individual who probably felt that he was fairly untouchable. I mean, you know, he was quite an imposing figure.
In 1968, 15-year-old Guy Marsden, Savile's nephew, along with 3 friends, headed south from Leeds in search of adventure. The young teenagers found themselves at Euston Station in London, where they were approached by 2 men.
I would have said about 30 years old, rock and roll, with leather jackets and long hair and that. And they were just saying, do you want to come to our place and that? You've got to try to remember that there were no such thing as perverts. There were, but you didn't hear of them. Don't even a name paedophile out then, I don't think. So we just thought, oh, they like us, you know. So anyway, we ended up going with these back to their flat.
At the time, Guy and his friends were unaware of the motives of the 2 men. Only recently has he found out the truth.
These people would pick people up from train stations, as in younger people. We'd then go to their houses, and then the ones higher up the chain would come to these houses to see who they'd picked up, to take them elsewhere to do whatever they were going to do with them.
Only days later, Guy was stunned when Jimmy Savile himself visited the flat. His first thought was that his family had tracked him down and they had sent Savile to bring him back to Leeds. The truth would be far worse.
And then my Uncle Jimmy came in, and he came in with his vicar and some kids. I thought that my Uncle Jimmy had caught me there because, I mean, I was proper scared, if you know what I mean. I was terrified, if you want. But now I'm 60, I think. He didn't catch me, I caught him.
Only recently has Guy been made aware that Jimmy Savile, far from being a lone predator, seemingly played an active role in supplying children to a network of child abusers in London.
Now, I have no conception of paedophilia or child abuse at all, neither has any other 3. So to us, our thoughts were, it's a party. You know, the people who live there, the man and lady who live there, are going to have a party. And it ended up where we were like huddled together, 4 of us, and then these little kids would come over to us.
As a naive 15-year-old, Guy was never completely aware of the role he played. But it appears he and his friends were unwitting accomplices in the group's depraved activities.
You'd have been talking from 6-year-old up to, I'd have said 10 at most. So they were young children. And then every so often, one of them would go, 2 of them would go. Still never thought nothing whatsoever about it.
These parties would last for days, with various men from all sections of society arriving and taking 1 or more young children into bedrooms and abusing them.
I think most decent people find it incomprehensible that these sort of organisations, rings, whatever we want to call them, exist. But no less incomprehensible than why would anybody abuse a child? That the fact that people come together to do it seems, in a way, somewhat more scary, because very often we're talking about people from, well, certainly people from all walks of life, but including people from the upper echelons of society.
To this day, Guy is still unclear as to exactly what role Savile played in the so-called parties.
My Uncle Jimmy, you saw him, I mean, he didn't even speak to us and acknowledge us. Every now and again you might have got a nod. He just seemed to come in, flitter about, you know, whatever they were doing, bringing little ones in and stuff like that, and then he'd go. I've recently found out that I were going to get, well, the police and things have called it groomed, to do what the people down London were doing, i.e. getting the kids and probably grown, you know, older girls and older boys to go to these parties up here in Leeds and places like that.
In 1969, after a year in the capital, Guy returned to Leeds. Even now, over 40 years later, having witnessed the sordid events in London, he considers